You don't want me to sing too, do you? No. Oh, okay. I got to know on that one. Mike, I don't know how come you guys always have to adjust these mics. All right. If you ever noticed them, if you ever watch the legislature, you'll find that they're always adjusting their mics. I haven't figured that one out here at that point. God has been faithful to us, hasn't he? He always is. Matter of fact, not only does the Bible teach us that the just shall live by faith, it also teaches us that the just shall live by his faithfulness to us. And I have found that to be true throughout the time of my life, particularly since I've given my heart to the Lord. And I think all of us have. It has not been that long ago when your former pastor retired and somebody whose name will be kept I won't mention that. You know, you have to protect the innocent sometime. Had invited me to come down and have an opportunity to help you out, to fill in for a little while for you. It was much interesting during the pilgrimage of those events and your interim pastor and other opportunities and things that were happening that God began to work out and not only allowed me to continue the ministry that I'm involved in, that God has led me to in the hospital setting, but also to have the privilege of serving with Brother Steve and Donna and part of your pastoral ministerial staff. The process had already begun. Many had dreamed about what God was doing. This facility was in the hearts of others many years before, and the donation of the property that allowed us to move here was exciting. The building, and we began to pray about how we were going to transition from the old facility to here. And I'll never forget that Sunday morning that we had talked about the days that had led to that. And on that Sunday morning, thanks to some of the connections of our church and our church members, we had guys out lining up cars and setting it up, and with police escort, the sheriff's escort, at the end of that day, before we said the benediction, and we ended that service in the old facility. Many of you, along with some who were not yet a part of our congregation, brought that caravan of cars in and met at the front door and came in singing and ended our worship service here that morning. Every part of this building, and I don't know how many of you know that, but in the weeks prior to us moving here and the completion of this facility, on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights we came, and the entirety of every part and every doorway and every passageway in the parking lots had all been prayed for. Underneath many of the places that are covered with carpet and baseboard, with highlighters and markers, the names of those who prayed for that area and the scripture many times that they read are there in those places. So we had prayed, and we wanted to make sure, and we knew we had some great contractors, but we knew that they had not, although they had prepared this for worship physically, they had not prepared it spiritually. And so we caravanned here. And we began to have the opportunity to worship and to serve God here in this facility. He's given us a wonderful place to worship. We are not yet through, as was shared by Judy, that we still have a journey to go. And I would not be happy if we were at the end of our journey, would you? We've got to continue to go forward in what God is doing. So what is God saying to us about today? What is God saying to us about the future? I began to think about that, and I began to realize that the thing that God says most is not about facilities. It is not about ministries. It is not about what we do or where we worship at or anything like that. The thing that God says to us most is love me. Love me, not me. I'm not pointing at me. God says love me himself. When Jesus was asked what was the most important thing for every believer to know, he responded very quickly in the words of Mark 12:30 that they are recorded. And he says to love me with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all of your strength, everything that you are. And while most translations use and translate this single word as love, which we understand in its many facets, the paraphrase called The Message kind of catches this in a little different venue. Because you see, the word translated love from the Greek language into the English language has many facets, far more than we can imagine by our singular word. I've oftentimes said it is almost a paradox of the English language, which I love ice cream. But the same word I use when I say, honey, I love ice cream is the same word I use to say, I love you to my wife. Now, it doesn't mean the same, does it? It better not. It better not for you either. But what he translates here, and the way the Message catches it, because there is another word, and the word love can also be defined in the language as passion. Passion. And the Message paraphrases this verse this way: love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intellect and energy. I like that. In other words, it means a higher level, to do it far and above just a normal ideology or things. This means to give it all to God. Everything you've got, to lay it all on the line, all the cliches that you may want to use. Paul also challenges us in that same way. In Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 23, when he says this, and I'm reading out of the Holman Christian Standard: whatever you do, do it enthusiastically, as something done for the Lord and not for men. Did you catch that? Whatever you do it with energy, do it with excitement, do it with love, do it with commitment, do it with what? Passion. Passion. Folks, you only do things with passion that is important to your heart, that's important to your life. And that's exactly what he says. So the question is not, and we could reiterate the history of the last 4 years, and that would be very easy to do. And while I am interested in the last 4 years of the foundation that has been built, and by the generations prior to that, and the construction of buildings and the work that was done in our community and all of those things, today I honor those things. But I am more interested in what's going to happen over the next 4 years. And the next years to come, and where we go from those points, and what God does in those times. I just love to get up, and I love to come because I want to see what God is doing. It's exciting to see that, isn't it? And over those next 4 years as a church, our focus needs to be that we're God-honoring. That we must not let Satan rob us of our passion in any way or our love for Christ. So there's some challenges that all of us have got to face. Because it is easy to get distracted. It is easy to lose direction and focus in our life. Now, there's those challenges out there. Now, there's literally hundreds of them that we could talk about this morning. But as I began to think about this, when Jesus came and they asked him what was the greatest of all the commandments, he only gave 2 of those things when he said to love God above everything else and to love your neighbor as yourself. What a focus it is. What an understanding that is. So when God is saying to us, the most important activity of all of our life, the most important commitment that any of us makes, if we want to do it is like God says to do it, is simply the title of the message this morning: God says, love me. Love me. Now, how do you do that? Do you do that with just words? No, there's a lot of ways that we can do that. And I want to talk about 5 things this morning that sometimes can become barriers to us loving God. Now, it's easy to say it, isn't it? And sometimes it's a little more difficult, to say that, I love you. But it also means that we've got to show that. And it's got to be by our activities. And so when we begin to think about those things, I want to focus on those things with you this morning. The first one is that we cannot leave God to chance. We can't do that. We can't just assume that what we do is enough. We can't just assume that if we're just doing the best we can, that God understands those things and that's it. You see, being passionate about God has nothing to do with our personality or our age.